It's great to be back and learning with you on a Wednesday, Yom Hamishi. Let me plug that in. Let's light up the darkness. I was just about to make a blessing on my cup of tea. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shak only he b'dvaro. Back in the saddle. Who's in the house? On a Wednesday, Yehudit in South Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, Bella in Florida, Guy in Ohio, Shandor in the Bronx, Yosef in New Jersey, Lucy in Minnesota, Lorraine in Texas, Nancy in North Carolina, Joe in the Inland Empire. Lucy says, glad you're back, you're so sweet. And Bill in mid-Missouri. Over there on YouTube, Alan in New York City, Roseanne in New York City, and I know Nina's having a little bit of trouble, some glitch getting the notification for people who come to YouTube via the AT app. That's getting worked out. Sorry about that. Also, Sharon in New Jersey. Welcome back, everybody. Our daf today is page 42. And with that, with God's help, we're going to finish chapter 5 and open chapter 6 here in Tractate Sanhedrin, the 24th volume of the Talmud. This chapter 5 was pretty short, and it was all about the examinations and interrogations of the witnesses and how the judges deliberate. Okay, we picked this up at the bottom of 41b, right near the bottom. It says, having cited a statement of Rabbi Acha bar Chanina, who was citing Rabbi Asi, who was citing Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara cites another statement in his name. So Rabbi Acha bar Chanina says that Rav Asi says that Rabbi Yochanan says, until how many days into a new month may one recite a blessing on the month, i.e. Birkas ha-levana. We usually refer to this now as kiddush levana, and this just came up last Shabbos. So basically, when you have Rosh Chodesh, so a new month begins, and when does a new Hebrew month begins? On the new moon, right? When the moon has none of it illuminated, not even the little crescent. On the first day of the month is when you start to see that crescent. So actually, here's a little moon phase chart. And if you look at it, there are 28 images of the moon. That's basically what you see on each day of the month, starting with that little crescent that grows and grows and grows, right, to a half moon, that grows and grows and grows to a full moon. When is a full moon? Right in the middle of the month, the 15th day of the month. And then the moon starts waning again each day until finally we have the new moon, where there's nothing of the moon eliminated. And that's when the next Hebrew month begins. So we have a tradition that we're going to be learning about today called kiddush levana, or birkas halevana, blessing the moon, which we say on the new month, right? And we don't say it on Rosh Chodesh. We say it as the moon becomes visible again and starts to grow. Now, different communities have different customs on this. So, like the week before last, when was Rosh Chodesh? It was on Thursday. So, Rosh Chodesh, the new month began on a Thursday. So, on that Shabbos, we were on the second or third day of the month, right? Rosh Chodesh is the first day of the month. So, 2 days later is going to be the third day of the month. Now, in a Litvish community, right, the Litvaks, who are, more, as opposed to a Hasidic community or a Sephardic community. So this kind of Northern European, more intellectually oriented, Talmudically oriented stream in Orthodox Judaism. So they will make Kiddush Levana even on the third day of the month. In a more Hasidic community, right, a little bit more Hasidically oriented, so we don't make Kiddush Levana until after the seventh day of the month. So a typical time for a congregation to do it is after Shabbos ends. But if the first Shabbos in the month, and it usually is prior to the seventh day of the month, we don't do it on that Shabbos. We do it the following Shabbos. So what we're going to be reading about today, Birkas HaLevana, blessing the moon, or Kiddush Levana, sanctifying the moon, is something that my community, the guys in my show will be doing it Saturday night after, Shabbos will conclude, and then we'll make Ma'ariv, which is really, Sunday, the daily prayers of Sunday that begin Saturday night. But then we'll go outside, and it's always kind of like very much it's very ancient. It's very not modern, right? It's not a modern custom. It doesn't feel modern in any way. We go outside. We have to be able to be in a place where we can see the moon. So if it's an overcast night, no Kiddush Levana. We're going to have to wait till the next day. And once we get to the 16th day after the month, right, after the full moon, when the moon is going to start to shrink again, then it's too late. Then you can't make Kiddush Levana. So that's what we're reading about now, and these are the blessings. And here we're just going to read like kind of the main text, but in the prayer books, other texts have been added to it, Psalms and some lines from Proverbs and from Torah. There's some dancing that goes on as well, and a very lovely custom where you have to say Shalom Aleichem to three people, and they have to answer you Aleichem Shalom, right? Peace to you, and may to you there be peace. All right, that's a little bit background on Kiddush Levana. Okay, so we've been talking about examining witnesses. What does that have to do with Kiddush Levana? Nothing. The only reason we're now talking about Kiddush Levana is because we had a teaching by this same chain of rabbis teaching in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. And so now we're just bringing another teaching from the same Rabbi Yochanan brought down by this chain of wisdom. But it has nothing to do with Sanhedrin and testimony and witnesses and judges. But while we're here. So, says Rabbi Yochanan, until how many days into a new month may one recite the blessing on the month? Birkas HaLevana. Until the flaw of the moon is filled, i.e. when it no longer appears deficient. And till how many days is that? Right, so one definition is, well, until it's full. Once it's a full moon, after that, it's going to start waning again, so you can't say this anymore. But others would say, no, until it's deficient means something else. That's what they're going to disagree on. So until the flaw of the moon is fulfilled, when it no longer appears deficient. Well, and until how many days is that? So Rav Yaakov Bar Idi says that Rav Yehuda says, until 7 days of the month have passed, right? So according to this view, you can only say Kiddush Levana during the first 7 days of the month Whereas the custom that we follow in my community is you can't say it during the first 7 days. You can only start to say it after the 7th. And then from the 7th to the 15th is the time for kiddush levana. But here, this view is only during the first 7 days, basically from when you go to a slight crescent until what looks like half of the moon is illuminated. And the sages of Nehardea say until 16 days of the month have passed. Now we're on page 42a. And the Gemara comments, and they both hold in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, that one can recite the blessing until the flaw of the moon is filled. And the dispute is that this one, i.e. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi, who holds that one can recite the blessing only until 7 days have passed, understands Rabbi Yochanan to be referring to the day when the moon will be like the string of a bow, right? Like a bow and arrow. So you have a crescent, right? The bow, and then the string, right? So basically like a half moon, a half circle, right? That one. Whoops. It's backwards for me, but that one, right? The half moon there. That's when he says until then, because after that, the moon is, after that, it's more than half of it is illuminated, and so you can't say that it's deficient, is the way that, who is this, Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi, understands Rabbi Yochanan's teaching about it till the moon is no longer deficient. Whereas that one, i.e. the sages of Nehardea, who holds that one can recite the blessing until 16 days have passed, understands Rabbi Yochanan to be referring to the day when the moon will be like a sieve, a round sieve, right? Meaning a full circle. Now, Rav Acha of Difti said to Ravina, and they should bless the blessing of, what blessing should they say when they make a blessing over the moon? Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who is good and who does good. A beautiful bracha. Who is it? God is good and who does good. For whom? For the benefit that people derive from the light of the moon. Right? So remember how important the moon was in an ancient society. There was starlight, on the night of a new moon, there was starlight, but that's not a lot of light if you have to walk around at night. Whereas, right, there's no street lights. Maybe in a town they had torches, but if you were out in the country, whatever, like you didn't have headlights, you didn't have flashlights, God willing, you had a torch with you, but so much of the world ran on moonlight. And when the moon was full, you could really see everything at night. When the moon was new, you could see very little. So during the days that the moon is increasing, so its light is increasing, and that's a benefit that people were very thankful for. I think I've mentioned this before in the past. Most of us, if you on any given day, if I asked you, what phase is the moon in now? You probably have no idea, right? Do you know what moon? How much moon do you expect to see tonight? You probably don't know. Ancients pretty much would always know. They always knew where the moon was. It was just something you knew. If you were a sailor at sea, it was unthinkable that you wouldn't know what the phase of the moon was. It was just such an important part of life. It was something everyone was aware of. So as the moon is growing, so to speak, the portion of the moon that's illuminated by the sun under the horizon, it's a big benefit, and people are blessing God for giving us that benefit. Ravina said to him, is that to say that when the moon is shrinking, so now when it starts waning again, that we should conversely bless, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe. Is that to say that when the moon is shrinking, we bless as we do for other disasters, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, the true judge? Right, Dianemis is like what we say when we hear that someone has died, right? Baruch Dianemis, blessed is God, the true judge. So that we should conversely bless, blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe, who is good and who does good when the moon is growing, right? So if we're saying this blessing when the moon is growing, God who is good and does good, should we also bless God, out of our sadness, but forcing ourselves to still be thankful when the moon is shrinking and say, blessed is God, the true judge? Hint, we don't do that. So why don't we do that? So Rav Acha of Difti said to him, well, you are correct, and we should say them both. The blessing of the true judge when the moon is waning, and the blessing of God who is good and who does good when the moon is waxing. We should do that. But Ravina answered him, no. Since this is its nature, we do not bless the moon. The waxing and waning of the moon is not an unexpected occurrence that requires these blessings. So Ravina wouldn't even make the blessing when the moon is growing. And Rabbi Acha Bar Chanina says that Rabbi Asi says that Rabbi Yochanan says, with regard to anyone who blesses the new month in its proper time, it is as if he greets the face of the divine presence. Now, we definitely are going to say a blessing, right, when the moon is new and starts to grow again. Are we saying it because the moon's light is growing? Or are we saying it because we're fulfilling the mitzvah that God gave us, the first mitzvah that we received as a nation, that we read about in last week's Torah portion, that this shall be the first of months for you, and you shall count the months, right? So, and as we've learned, the Sanhedrin will declare when a new month has begun, etc. God made us his partner, so to speak, in announcing the calendar and when the new months begin, which is based on the moon, right? So we're certainly going to say a blessing because there's a new month, and we're asking God, please bless us that in this new month that is coming, it should come for good and good things should happen in this month. So are we also going to bless the moon? Well, we do, but how do we get there? So again, Rabbi Acha Bar Chanina says that Rabbi Asi says that Rabbi Yochanan says that with regard to anyone who blesses the new month in its proper time, at the right time, it is as if he greets the face of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence. This is a time when you can really get close to God and feel God's presence. And alluding to this, it is written here concerning the sanctification of the new month. This month, here it is. This month shall be for you the beginning of months. Exodus 12:2 that I just mentioned. And it is written there where the Jewish people encountered the divine presence at the splitting of the sea. This is my God, and I will glorify him. Exodus 15:2. And the term this is employed in both verses. And the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, if the Jewish people merited to greet the face of their Father in heaven only one time each and every month, it would suffice for them. Dayenu. Since in the blessing of the moon, there is an aspect of greeting the divine presence. And Abaye said, therefore, we will say the blessing while standing in honor of the divine presence. When we go outside under the moon, like I said, depending on the community, but in that first half of the month, for us, between the 7th and the 15th day, you have to do it where you can see the moon, and you have to be standing. And it's a way of thanking God and coming closer to God outside, right? So often we're praying inside, but this is one that you do outside. And the Gemara relates that Marimar and Marzutra would lean on one another's shoulders and recite the blessing. Rav Acha said to Rav Ashi in the West, meaning in Eretz Yisrael as opposed to in Bavel, they recite the following blessing on the moon: blessed is he who renews the months. Rav Ashi said to him, our women also recite that blessing, meaning that this is an abridged version for the unlettered, right? Because women didn't get the same education back then that men did. So rather, the full blessing, the full version of the blessing, is the version of Rav Yehuda, and this is the centerpiece of Kiddush Levana. As Rav Yehuda says, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who by his word created the heavens, and by the breath of his mouth all their hosts. He set for them a law and a time, that they should not deviate from their task, and they are joyous and glad to perform the will of their owner. They are workers of truth, whose work is truth. Beautiful, kind of, ascribing a joy in their task to the stars, right? The hosts are the stars in heaven, but by extension, the angels, like all the heavenly bodies that we see and that we don't see are joyfully doing the will of that creator, of our creator, and that should inspire us likewise to do the will of our creator. This blessing continues. Right, and they are joyous and glad to perform the will of their owner. They are workers of truth, whose work is truth. And to the moon, he said that it should renew itself as a crown of beauty for those he carried from the womb, as they are destined to be renewed like it. This is a wonderful prayer of hope. Even when things are bad, they're going to turn up again. Just as the moon is constantly waxing and waning, so the fortunes, the fate, so to speak, of the Jewish people, we're going to go through terrible times, but we will come out of it, and times will get good again. Then they'll go bad again, but they'll get good again. We're always on this up and down roller coaster in life, as a nation and as individuals. And to the moon, he said that it should renew itself as a crown of beauty for those he carried from the womb, as they are destined to be renewed like it, and to praise their creator for the name of his glorious kingdom. Blessed are you, the Lord, who renews the months. And we also have a few other songs and blessings that we say during Kiddush Levana. Again, we greet each other 3 times. You greet 3 people and they greet you back. We often will dance, David Chavik Hayam, a little bit. We also just as I jump toward you, you jump toward me. There's some really interesting prayers. You can read it in any Jewish prayer book or you can Google it, Kiddush Levana. Okay. Levana means moon, Kiddush means sanctification. Okay. The Gemara presents another statement, citing Rabbi Acha, citing Rabbi Asi, citing Rabbi Yochanan. Right? Just the same chain of transmission. That's why we went to Kiddush Levana. Now, something else we learned from Rabbi Yochanan via these sages, quote, "For by wise advice you shall make war." Proverbs 24:6. So Rabbi Acha Bar Chanina says that Rabbi Asi says that Rabbi Yochanan says, "In whom do you find the war?" i.e. the ability to engage in disputes of Torah. In one who has in his possession bundles, i.e. vast knowledge of Mishna. One must first learn the primary sources before engaging in disputes of Torah. Rav Yosef would read concerning himself the verse, "And much produce comes by the strength of the ox." Proverbs 14:4, meaning one with great strength can bring a large yield. And Rav Yosef was known to be particularly well versed in the statements of the Tanaim, the sages of the Mishnah. New subject. The Mishnah teaches, now we're back to the deliberations of the judges in a capital case. The Mishnah teaches that if one witness says that the event, or actually first the witness testimony, that if one witness says that the event occurred at 2 hours, i.e. the second hour of the day from sunrise, and the other witness says that the event occurred at 3 hours, their testimony stands. In other words, people don't necessarily know exactly, was it the second hour, was it the third hour of the day, was it 8 o'clock in the morning, was it 9 o'clock in the morning? It's hard to tell when you don't have watches. So we're not going to say that these 2 witnesses are contradicting each other with their testimony. Rav Shimi Bar Ashi says this was taught only when there was a difference in the hours. But if one witness says that the event occurred before the sunrise, and one says that the event occurred after the sunrise, then their testimony is void. Although this difference may only be may be a smaller discrepancy in terms of time, might only be a few minutes apart. Nevertheless, the difference between before and after sunrise cannot be ascribed to an error. It must be that something's wrong with the testimony, and we're not going to convict a person who's accused and stands to be executed if he's convicted. The Gemara asks, isn't this obvious? There is a clear difference between darkness and light. So rather, Rav Shimi Bar Ashi said as follows: if one witness says that the event occurred before the sunrise, and the other witness says that the event occurred during the sunrise, still their testimony is void. And the Gemara asks, well, isn't this also obvious? And the Gemara answers, lest you say that this one who says during the sunrise was standing in an exposed place, and he saw a mere shine and thought he saw the sunrise. Rav Shimi bar Ashi teaches us that the court does not assume this occurred and deems the testimony incongruent. Right? So remember that the interrogations of the witnesses is establishing the place and time, and if they disagree at all in terms of where it happened and when it happened, then their testimony is void and there will not be a conviction in a death penalty case. The Mishnah teaches, and afterward they bring in the second witness and examine him. So later, the Mishnah stated, but if one of those students said, one of the students who were sitting before the judges, right? These are aspiring sages who are presently students and not judges of the court, but they're learning from the judges of the court how they deliberate the case, because the judges are also their teachers. The judges are the sages, and they are the teachers of these students who sit before the court. So, if one of the students said, I can teach a reason to acquit him, so they elevate that student to a seat on the court and seat him among the judges, and then he would not descend from there all day. So the Gemara asks, that day and no more? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa, if the statement of that student has substance, he would never descend from there, as his statement demonstrates that he is capable of deliberating with the other judges. That's it. We're not talking about, elementary school students or even high school students. We're talking about, they're already rabbis. The question is, are they at the level that they can be one of the judges? Well, when they have a reason to acquit, they're going to join the judges. And if, as they teach that reason to acquit the defendant, they demonstrate that they have enough knowledge of Torah and analytical skill and reasoning ability and etc., they carry themselves like a sage, worthy to be among the judges, then they can remain among the judges. But if the statement of that student does not have substance, he would not descend from there the entire day, meaning he can stay up there for one day, but after that he's going to go back sitting among the students. Why does he stay for that one day? In order that his ascent should not be a descent for him, i.e. to avoid humiliating him. That he spoke up to acquit the defendant, but his statement had no substance, it would be embarrassing. So they keep him up there for one day and then he goes back. Abaye said, interpret the Mishnah to be with regard to a case when the statement of that student does not have substance. So the Mishnah teaches that if the court found it fit to acquit the defendant during the deliberations, as all or a majority of them agree to acquit the defendant, so then they excuse the defendant. The case is done. The Mishnah further taught that the judges would not drink wine all day. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason that they did not drink wine? Seems like pretty good common sense. Judges in a case of capital law, in a murder case, for example, shouldn't be drinking wine while they're hearing testimony and then engaging in deliberations. But we're not going to just accept it as common sense. What is the reason they did not drink wine? Rabbi Acha bar Chanina says that it is because the verse states, Proverbs 31:4, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes to say, where is strong drink? So Rabbi Acha bar Chanina explains, this is a directive to those who deal with the secret of the world, i.e., who deal with stringent matters like judging in a life or death case, do not become drunk. They get back to common sense. New subject. The Mishnah teaches if the court found it fit to acquit him during the deliberations, as all or a majority of them agree to acquit him, they release him. It was further taught in the Mishnah that when the court cannot arrive at a verdict, they add judges in pairs of two and deliberate until there is a clear verdict. So if they added the maximum number of judges, right, they start with a court of 23 because it's a capital law case, and then if they can't reach a verdict for whatever reason, because it's 12 to 11 to convict, but in order to convict, you need a majority of at least two. A supermajority of at least two more than who are voting to acquit, then you have to add two more judges, right? And so then If they get to a majority to acquit, case is over. But if they keep with a majority to convict, but not the supermajority, they keep adding pairs of judges until there are 71 judges. That's the maximum number of judges on the bench. That's the number on a Sanhedrin, a great Sanhedrin. Okay, so they add pairs in twos. If they added the maximum number of judges and they still cannot reach a clear verdict, they discuss the matter until one of those who deems him liable sees the validity of the statements of those who acquit and changes his position. And then the defendant is acquitted. So the Gemara asks, if the judges do not change their position, as they do not see the validity of the position of those who acquit him, then what is done? Right? So you've got 71 judges and you end up with 36 to 35 to convict. It's not enough for a conviction because there's no supermajority. You can't add any more judges. It's not a clear acquittal because you still have a majority saying convict. So then what? Rabbi Acha says, well, at that point, they release him as he was not found liable by the supermajority. And likewise, Rabbi Yochanan says, they release him. And Rav Papa said to Abaye, but if they ultimately release him, if the court is deadlocked, why do they attempt to convince each other at all when they should release him from the outset? And Abaye said to him, this is what Rabbi Yochanan said. The reason is so that they do not leave the court confounded without reaching some definite conclusion, as this would tarnish the reputation of the court. Right? So you might have thought that, well, when it was 12 to 11, they didn't have the supermajority. Okay, they don't have the supermajority. They release him. No, they're going to try to get to a clear verdict, either a clear acquittal or a clear conviction. 12-11 to convict is not enough for a conviction, but it's not a clear acquittal either, and that's why they keep deliberating, and that's for the sake of the honor of the court, that they should have a clear verdict. Some say that this is what Rav Papa said to Abaye. But why do I need them to add judges at all when they should release him from the first court? Once the first court did not find him liable, they should release him. Why add judges? And Abaye said to him, Rabbi Yosei holds in accordance with your opinion, as it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yosei says, just as the court does not add judges to a court of 71, so too the court does not add judges to a court of 23. If the court of 23 cannot arrive at a verdict, they release him. That was Rabbi Yosei's view, but that's not what we follow. The sages taught in cases of monetary law, one says, the judgment has grown aged. The judgment has grown aged. I.e., this matter is very difficult and it requires scrutiny. But in cases of capital law, one does not say the judgment has grown aged. So the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of the judgment has grown aged? If we say that the intention of this statement, when we say that the matter has grown difficult and requires great scrutiny in order to arrive at an answer, what is the intent of that statement? Do we say that the intention is, if we say that the intention is, the judgment has, it says, we say the judgment has grown aged. So what do we mean by that? If we say that the intention is the judgment has aged, i.e., taken an extended amount of time, but requires additional deliberations, well, if so, he should say the reverse, as it is more critical to extend deliberations in cases of capital law than in cases of monetary law. We only say that the judgment has grown aged in a monetary law case, but we don't say it in a capital law case. So we're going to say, well, it's difficult and we require further scrutiny. That sounds like something we would say in a capital law case and not in a much simpler monetary law case where even if we get it wrong, we could always just reverse the payment. Whereas in a capital law case, if we get it wrong, the defendant will have been executed and we can never get back from that. So Rav Huna bar Manoach said in the name of Rav Acha, the son of Rav Ika, reverse the statement and say that in cases of monetary law, one does not say the judgment has grown aged. But in cases of capital law, one does say it. Rav Ashi said, actually, no, do not reverse it. And what is the meaning of the judgment has grown aged? It means that the judgment has grown wise, like an elder who has acquired wisdom. In other words, the deliberations have been exhausted and it is time to vote on a verdict. In other words, in a monetary law case, once we've deliberated for a long time, somebody, perhaps the senior judge, can say, enough deliberations, let's vote. Whereas in a capital law case, they'll keep deliberating until everybody's very clear on the law. Now, the Gemara raises an objection to the first explanation from a Baraisa. In a situation where they did not reach a decision, the greatest among the judges says the judgment has grown aged. So the Gemara explains why this is an objection to the first view. Granted, if you say this means the judgment has grown wise, meaning it's time to vote, enough with the deliberations, this would be why the Baraisa states that the greatest judge says this statement, as arriving at a verdict is an honor for the court, and consequently the greatest of the court should be the one to announce it. But if you say that this statement means the judgment has aged, meaning is it that we haven't figured it out, we're going to keep digging, is it not enough that the greatest among the judges in particular not say so? Must he humiliate himself by stating that they are unable to reach a verdict? This would not be an honor for the head of the court, because it's not an honor for the court that they can't reach a verdict. And the Gemara answers, yes, the greatest of the judges must also announce that the court is unable to reach a verdict. Being shamed by oneself is not comparable to being shamed by others. Therefore, it is preferable that the greatest of the judges state this conclusion, rather than having one of the more junior judges state it. And some say they raise an objection to the second explanation. Granted, if you say this means the judgment has aged, this would be the reason that the greatest one states it, because being shamed by oneself is not comparable to being shamed by others. But if you say this means the judgment has grown wise, should the greatest judge praise himself? But isn't it written, let another man praise you, and not your own mouth, a stranger, and not your own lips, right? We should not praise ourselves. Let someone else do that. And the Gemara answers, a matter of the court is different, as its administration is incumbent upon the greatest sage. The greatest sage in the room has a greater responsibility than all the other sages. As we learned in the Mishna on page 29a, when they finished deliberating the matter, they would bring in the litigants, and the greatest of the judges would say, so-and-so, you are exempt from paying, or so-and-so, you are liable to pay. And likewise, it should be the greatest of the judges who would say either, okay, enough deliberation, let's vote, or we're just unable to reach a verdict, we need to add more judges or do something else. And that concludes this Mishnah, and with it, chapter 5. Here in Tractate Sanhedrin, we now move on to chapter 6. Chapter 6 is all about after the judges convicted a defendant in a capital law case. So this man, probably man, not necessarily, but let's say it's a man, stands to be executed, right? So even now he's convicted, meaning he's on his way to be executed, and they don't waste time. There's no death row, right? If the court convicts you of a death penalty offense, so you leave the court and you get executed, right? Very different than American jurisprudence. Now, kind of really resonates why they're so... why they lean so much to finding a reason to excuse the defendant rather than convict him, because if they do convict him, he leaves the courtroom and he goes out to be executed. But there is some amount of time between being convicted and reaching the place of the execution. And during that walk and during that period, if we can find some reason to acquit him, we'll bring him back, right? And that's what we're going to be talking about here. So page 42b, opening chapter 6, Mishnah number 1. When the trial has ended in a guilty verdict, and the condemned man has been sentenced to be stoned, he is taken out to be stoned. And the place of stoning was outside the court and a little beyond. As it is stated with regard to a blasphemer, take out him who has cursed to outside the camp, and let all that heard him speak his blasphemy, lay their hands upon his head, and let all the congregation stone him. That's Leviticus 24:14. So, What does this mean? One man stands at the entrance to the court with cloths in his hand, and another man sits on a horse at a distance from him, but where he can still see the man with the cloths near the court. So if one of the judges says, I can teach a reason to acquit him, so the other, i.e. the man with the cloths, waves the cloths as a signal to the man who's on the horse. And the man on the horse races off after the court agents who are leading the condemned man to his execution. And he stops them. And they wait until the court determines whether or not the argument has substance. And even if he, the condemned man, himself says, I can teach a reason to acquit myself, he is returned to the courthouse, even 4 or 5 times, provided that there is substance to his words. He can't just say nonsense, but if he has some kind of a legal Torah argument, we listen to it and we postpone the execution. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The Gemara asks, and was the place of stoning just outside the court and nothing more? Does it suffice that the place of execution is only a short distance from the court and no further? But isn't it taught in a baraisa? The place of stoning was outside the distance that is equivalent to the length of the 3 camps in the wilderness. The 3 camps in the wilderness. I don't know if you can see this figure here. The top figure is meant to be an illustration of the children of Israel in the wilderness. And the dark little square in the center, that is the tabernacle, the Mishkan. And then the 3 sort of groupings around it, those are the camps of the Levium, the Levites. Right? So that by their 3 families, the descendants of Levi, right? The 3rd son of Jacob. And then the array around them, right? There's sort of 4 groups of 3 to the east, north, west, and south of that inner camp. Those are the tribes of Israel. Now, what you're looking at is an array of the encampment of 2 to 3 million people in the wilderness. This was like a portable city. Right? I mean, think about a city that has 2 to 3 million people all camping together in the wilderness. This was the project, right, of keeping all those people alive with manna, keeping them all drinking water in the desert, right, and out of the boiling sun. This is all the gifts from God to the Jewish people, the manna, the water, and the clouds of glory giving us shade. And just yesterday, we had the reading of the manna, the chapter of the manna. It's in this week's Torah portion. This is my favorite Torah portion, Beshalach, which also includes crossing the Sea of Reeds with the water that has been parted, right? That God parted the water after Moses raised his staff. And the first of the Jews, Nachshon ben Aminadav, walked in up to his nostrils, and the sea parted. And it was a wall of water. Not like a waterfall, but like glass. Like you could put your hand through the water and pull out a fish or a pomegranate or an apple, and then pull your hand out like a vertical wall of water that you could even reach inside. Absolutely, everyone experienced a degree of the miracle and prophecy as they walked through the sea. An incredible, incredible moment in Jewish history. But also the manna was mentioned, and this is a good week to read the chapter of the manna. Nina sent it out in this week's newsletter, which if you're not subscribed to, you should be. The Accidental Talmudist newsletter. You can sign up at accidentaltalmudist.org. But reading the chapter of the manna, which describes the first time that God sent the manna in the morning for the people to eat. If we read it, especially yesterday, but even this week, and recognize that everything in our lives is like the manna. Any blessing we have, any money we have, any food we have, the roof over our heads, the clothes on our bodies, everything is a gift from God, and we acknowledge that and thank God for it. We're more likely to have more, actually, in our lives. Let us keep reading. I got a little distracted there. Okay, so the point is the encampment, right? So 2 to 3 million people in that array that I just showed you the figure of. And if they're saying that you got to take the person who's going to be executed outside the camp, right? That's not like a walk up the block. A city, a portable city of 2 to 3 million people, you're going to be walking for like a couple of miles before you reach outside the camp. It's very, very large, at least a few kilometers, let's say. Okay, so let's keep reading. But isn't it taught in a baraisa the place of the stoning was outside the distance that is equivalent to the length of the 3 camps in the wilderness? What are the 3 camps? The camp of the divine presence. That's the tabernacle in the center where, where the sacrifices are made, etc., and where the presence of God rested. The camp of the Levites, which was around the tabernacle, and the camp of the Israelites, the array of tribes around them. So 3 camps, the divine presence, the Levites, and the Israelites going outbound from the center. So in Jerusalem, there were 3 corresponding camps. Right? That's why the lower figure is the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. Right? So you have the temple and its courtyard. This is the camp of the divine presence. Then you have the whole Temple Mount. That's equivalent to the camp of the Levites. And then you have Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem. Beyond that, that is understood to be the equivalent of the camp of the Israelites, the array of the tribes in the desert. Right, the temple in Jerusalem, there were 3 corresponding camps: the temple with its courtyard, the Temple Mount, and the rest of Jerusalem. So the distance in the wilderness outside of the 3 camps corresponds to a place outside the city walls and limits. So the Sanhedrin convicts somebody to die in Jerusalem. He has to go outside of the whole city of Jerusalem to the place of stoning, not just outside the courtroom. So the Gemara answers, yes, it is as you said, that the place of stoning was outside the 3 camps. And the practical difference from the fact that the Mishna teaches the law in this manner is that if it happened that the court went out and convened outside the 3 camps, if the court didn't convene, on the Temple Mount in the chamber of hewn stone, but rather it convened somewhere outside of Jerusalem, or in the wilderness, it convened outside the camp of the Israelites. So then could the place of stoning be right outside the courtroom? Right, if it happened that the court went out and convened outside the 3 camps, even then, the place of stoning is set up a certain distance from the court and not immediately adjacent to it, so that the court should not appear to be a court of killers, right? It would appear to be a bloodthirsty court if it was doing its executing right outside the court. Alternatively, the reason the place of stoning must be distanced from the court is so that the condemned man might have a chance to be saved, i.e., so that during the time it takes for him to be taken from the court to the place of stoning, someone will devise a claim in his favor. They want him to have at least, the time it takes to walk, a kilometer or 2, so that maybe someone will come up with an argument that will save him. The Gemara asks, from where is this matter derived that the stoning is carried out outside the 3 camps? As the sages taught a baraisa with regard to the verse, Leviticus 24:14, take out him who has cursed to outside the camp. Right? The blasphemer who cursed God's name among the children of Israel in the wilderness. A little bit different than people who just say stuff, profane God's name with their lips all the time. They don't even know what they're saying. They don't have any notion of who God is, what God is. It's not the same, right? We don't execute people for blasphemy. But you can kind of understand why in that setting, with the presence of God plainly manifest to 2 million people who are all eating miraculous food every day and drinking miraculous water and sitting under miraculous clouds, and a person in that context curses God's name. I mean, I don't know what that guy was thinking. But he got the death penalty. And they said, take him outside the camp. So, but if there's three camps, sort of concentric camps, how do we know that outside the camp means outside of all three camps? Take him who was cursed to outside the camp. Well, this means outside the three camps, i.e., even outside the camp of the Israelites. Do you say that he is taken outside of the three camps? Or is he perhaps taken outside only one camp? Maybe they try him in the tabernacle and he just has to go out of that camp, meaning he could be in the camp of the Levites. Proof is brought that he must be taken outside of all three camps. It is stated here that the condemned man is taken outside the camp, and it is stated with regard to the bulls brought as sin offerings that are burned, that they must be burned outside the camp, Leviticus 4:12. So just as there, the bulls brought as a sin offering are burned when outside of all three camps, so too here, the condemned man is taken outside of the three camps. So the Gemara asks, and there, with regard to the bulls brought as sin offerings that are burned, from where do we derive that they must be burned when outside of all three camps? As the sages taught in a Baraisa, it is stated about the bull brought as a sin offering of the high priest, even the whole bull shall he carry outside the camp, unto a clean place where the ashes are poured out, and burn it. Leviticus 4:12. Meaning that he should take that bull outside the three camps. Do you say that he takes it outside the three camps? Perhaps he's only required to take it outside of one camp. How do you know it's all three camps? It only said outside the camp. When the verse states with regard to the bull brought as a communal sin offering, he shall carry the bull outside the camp and burn it as he burned the first bull. Leviticus 4:21. So it requires explanation, as there is no need for the verse to state outside the camp, since it already stated at the end of that same verse, and burn it as he burned the first bull. We already know that the first bull went outside the camp. Why do we say burn the second bull outside the camp just as he burned the first bull? We would have known it was outside the camp simply by saying just as he did the first bull. So this outside the camp is now free to teach us something. So what then does the verse mean when it states outside the camp a second time? It is to give it a second camp, i.e. it indicates that it must be removed not only from the camp of the divine presence corresponding to the temple, but also from the Levite camp, which corresponds to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And when another verse states with regard to the removal of the ash, and he shall put off his garments and put on other garments and carry forth the ashes outside the camp to a clean place, in Leviticus 6:4, that verse also requires an explanation, as there is no need for the verse to state this, since it already stated with regard to the bull brought as a sin offering of a high priest, even the whole bull shall he carry outside the camp to a clean place where the ashes are poured out, and burn it on wood with fire. Where the ashes are poured out, shall it be burned. The repetition of outside the camp indicates that he is required to give it a third camp, teaching that it is burned when outside the Israelite camp, or later in history, when the temple stood in Jerusalem, the bull that was sacrificed and had to be taken outside the camp to be burned had to be taken not only outside the temple, not only outside the Temple Mount, but outside of the city of Jerusalem entirely. Now the Gemara challenges this derivation of the law governing one who is sentenced to be stoned from the law governing the burning of the bulls, which are brought as sin offerings. Why are those things going to be connected? They both mention outside the camp, but it's outside the camp in such a different context. On the one hand, somebody being executed. On the other hand, part of an atonement process, either for the high priest or for the whole nation. Perhaps the place of stoning should be learned from the law governing offerings which are slaughtered outside the temple courtyard, about which the verse also uses the expression outside the camp in Leviticus 17:3. And just as there, with regard to offerings slaughtered outside the temple courtyard, these words mean outside only one camp. If we say outside the temple courtyard, you could still do it on the Temple Mount. You don't have to go outside of Jerusalem. The camp of the divine presence corresponding to the temple, as the next verse states, and he did not bring it to the door of the tent of meeting, i.e. the camp of the divine presence, so too here, perhaps the condemned man should be stoned outside one camp, right? So in Jerusalem, we don't do it in the temple courtyard, but it would be okay to do it somewhere else on the Temple Mount. And the Gemara answers, for 3 reasons, it is reasonable to derive the law governing one who is sentenced to be stoned from the law governing bulls brought as sin offerings that are burned. Better to compare to the one being stoned to the bulls that are burned than to offerings which are being slaughtered outside of the temple courtyard. So why is the first comparison better than the second? So the Gemara explains, as with regard to the man to be stoned for blasphemy, it states, take out him who has cursed to outside the camp. So take out, this is chotzer, which is similar to what is stated about the sin bull offerings. Even the whole bull shall he carry outside, vechotzi, outside the temple courtyard. And then it merely says, whereas with regard to offerings slaughtered outside the temple courtyard, it merely says outside the camp. You'll slaughter them outside the camp. But we don't say we will carry it outside and slaughter it there. So there's a little bit more of a parallel with the communal sin offerings than there is with these things that are slaughtered outside the temple. Additionally, both in the case of stoning and in the case of bulls brought as sin offerings, going outside the camp renders the act fit, as the blasphemer may not be stoned and the bulls may not be burned inside the camp. And this is in contrast to the case of the offerings that are slaughtered outside the temple courtyard, where slaughtering them outside the camp renders the act forbidden. That law comes to say that you may not slaughter outside of the temple courtyard. Only sacrifices that are slaughtered in the temple courtyard are fit offerings and are then permitted to proceed up to the altar, right? So if you're doing it outside the camp, that's bad. Whereas for the communal sin bull offerings and this man who's meant to be stoned, the proper thing to do is to slaughter them or to stone him outside the camp. That's a much better analogy, I would say. And additionally, both in the case of stoning and in the case of the bulls brought as sin offerings, being outside the camp achieves atonement, as both capital punishment and sin offerings atone for sin. Okay, so we get that sin offerings make an atonement for sin. What does it mean that capital punishment atones? Well, one who, committed a capital crime and is sentenced to be executed and is executed, his death is actually an atonement for his sin. It's not a complete atonement, but it actually helps him in the next world because he paid the price for his crime. Whereas somebody who committed a capital crime and is not executed is going to have to pay a much steeper price in the world to come. Now, the Gemara rejects this reasoning. On the contrary, the law governing one who is sentenced to be stoned should be derived from the law governing offerings that were slaughtered outside the temple courtyard, and we will give you 4 reasons for that. So the Gemara lists them. As in both cases, it is a person who is outside, either the one who is taken outside for stoning or the one who improperly slaughters the offerings outside the temple courtyard. Whereas in the case of bulls brought as sin offerings, it is the bulls that are carried outside the camp. Number 2, both the blasphemer and the one who slaughters offerings outside the temple courtyard have committed a sin, while the bull has not. Number 3, both the blasphemer and the one who slaughters offerings outside the temple courtyard pay with their souls, as slaughtering an offering outside the temple is punishable by kares, excision, right? Which could mean either an early death or loss of their place in the world to come, etc. And number 4, lastly, both in the case of the blasphemer and in the case of offerings slaughtered outside the temple courtyard, the law of disqualification of an offering that was sacrificed with the intent to consume it after its designated time, this is called pigul, and right, if a priest had in mind for a sin offering, the priests eat a piece of the sin offering, but they have to eat it within a certain amount of time. And if he had in mind that he was going to eat his portion of the sin offering after that amount of time had passed, then the offering is disqualified from that moment because his intention was improper. That's called pigul. Pigul is not applicable, whereas this law is applicable to the bulls brought as sin offerings. So the Gemara explains, nevertheless, the Baraisa prefers to compare one case requiring going outside the camp to render an act fit, and another case requiring going outside the camp to render an act fit. The communal sin bull offerings are slaughtered outside the camp, which is appropriate. The one who is stoned is executed outside the camp, which is appropriate. And those things are appropriate. Whereas somebody who slaughters inappropriately his offerings outside the temple courtyard, rendering those offerings disqualified from being brought on the altar, we're going to learn out two laws that are making something correct and not compare them to making something incorrect. Rav Papa said, and I'm almost done. So questions or comments, please get them in now. I know it's been a long class, but I'm almost done. Rav Papa said, the matter of the location of the place of stoning can be derived from the verses themselves. Where was Moses sitting when the matter of the blasphemer was brought before him? He was sitting in the Levite camp, as he was a Levite. And it was there that the blasphemer was brought for trial. They didn't have trials in the tabernacle, in the Mishkan. Trial was held in the Levite camp. And the merciful one said to Moses, take out him who has cursed to outside the camp, indicating that he should be taken outside the Levite camp, which would put him in the Israelite camp. So just one camp removal. And later it says, and Moses spoke to the children of Israel, and they brought him that had cursed out of the camp, and they stoned him with a stone. And the children of Israel did as the Lord commanded Moses. Leviticus 24:23. So this teaches that he was taken outside of their camp as well. After the trial, Moses had him removed to the Israelite camp. It was the Israelites who then were charged with performing the execution, and they took the blasphemer outside of their camp. And that's how we know it's outside of all three camps. The Gemara objects to this, but this additional verse is necessary just to teach us about the implementation of God's instructions, i.e., the Jewish people did in fact carry out God's command. But this verse should not be understood as referring to an additional camp. And the Gemara answers this challenge by saying the implementation of God's instructions is written explicitly, as it is stated in the continuation of the verse, and the children of Israel did as the Lord commanded Moses. And finally, and we're at the top of 43a, the Gemara asks, if that is so, what do they do with the words in the verse, and they stoned him with a stone? These words appear to be superfluous, as even without them we would know that God's instructions to stone the blasphemer were implemented. What then do they serve to teach? And the Gemara answers that phrase is necessary for that which is taught in a Baraisa. The verse states, and they stoned him with a stone. The word him teaches that they stoned him alone while he was naked, but not while he was in his clothing. So that's kind of a shame for the guy who's dying by being stoned, that he has to be naked when that happens to him. Well, you should have thought of that before you committed a capital crime. The verse uses the singular term stone, avin, rather than the plural term stones, avanim, to teach that if the condemned man died after being struck with one stone, the court has fulfilled its obligation. And remember that stoning is not like stand somebody against a wall and throw rocks at him. Stoning actually means that they take him up to a height, and it's not super high, something like 16 feet, and throw him off that platform. I don't know, maybe they tie his hands and make him land on his head, and that will probably kill him. And if it doesn't, then they take him up to the top again and throw him down again. Right? Okay. Few questions. Elise, I actually gaze at the moon regularly. I just don't correlate it with the Jewish calendar per se. I should focus on that more. Awesome. Now you'll remember that from the new moon until it's full is the first half of the month, and from when it's waning from the full moon to the new moon is the second half of the Hebrew month. Joe, Tonight is first quarter. Thank you very much. Sharon, I seem to remember learning at the shul where I grew up, we said kiddush levana after the third day of the month, Motzi Shabbos after Marv, same with us. After the brachas, they would greet everyone and sing Siman Tov, U'Mazel Tov, U'Mazel Tov, Siman Tov. Exactly, that's what we do also. Sadly, unless I am there for that Shabbos, I don't get to do it. Sharon also says, am I understanding that a capital punishment then is like a sacrifice, like a sin offering? Doesn't that come awfully close to human sacrifice? No, I mean, there is the sense that there is an atoning for the nation because we shouldn't have somebody who committed murder and tolerate. We have to have courts of law, and we can't tolerate that a murderer is getting away with it and not have a trial. So in that sense, it's good for the nation that a murderer is brought to trial. But the atonement that they're really talking about here is that it's an atonement for the murderer, right? For the murderer, that he suffers that execution, but now he has a chance at some kind of a portion in the world to come that maybe he wouldn't have had if he got away with it, and then he's going to pay, the ultimate price in the next world. And Beverly, you are no doubt heaven sent. Thank you for everything you are doing. I watch and share your programs. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Beverly. Thank you so much. Everything we do here at Accidental Talmudist is, to just try and share what we find so beautiful and we're so grateful for in the tradition, and we're just always so excited about it and love to share it with people who are excited to learn it like yourself. So thank you for that. And with God's help, we'll all be together again tomorrow, Thursday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a good night.